If we return to Daniel 10, what I hope to show you this afternoon after lunch is that the truth that we've understood about Daniel 11:40-45 has been illustrated in the history of verse 5 and onward in Daniel 11. But before we get there, we'll take up the first few verses of Daniel 11 after we finish off Daniel 10 and deal with the 45th President of the United States. This is pretty much a matter of public record. I'm calling him Bush the Great in relation to his son, Bush II. Okay? If Bush II has grandchildren, then those grandchildren would call him Grandpa, but they would call his dad Great-Grandpa. That's the kind of reason I'm calling it great. But I'm calling it great because we find that these two leaders that are both here at the time of the end, Reagan and Bush, have been typified by other doubling of leaders. And Alexander the Great, we have a quote where she ties him into Julius Caesar, but I won't go there. But we have Cyrus the Great that we can line up underneath him, Antiochus the Great, and Bush the Great. They line up. And when you see these graders, this Antiochus the Great, from the verse where you find him in Daniel 11, talks about two sons, and he's the certain one. So you can take prophetic license to say that he's the great, because he's the one that's emphasized above his brother, who is also in that verse. So I'm putting these here because Alexander the Great, he starts a new world order. He's the one that brings the world into the kingdom of the world that we understand, that Daniel 11 is the point of reference. And we have a quote where Sister White identifies that Alexander the Great typifies Julius Caesar. And Julius Caesar is the Caesar that conquers the third geographical area for pagan Rome and establishes a new world order. So you've got Alexander the Great establishing a new world order, and Sister White says he typifies Julius Caesar, who establishes the Roman world order. And when Bush the First, Bush the Greater, right after, it was in 1989, by the way, that he came out and he says we've now entered into a new world order. When it comes to these double leaders, we're beginning to see that the second one is marking a new world order, and I wanted to put that in place. We'll deal with that later. It's interesting to note that here you have a Republican, Democrat, but Republican, and the Democrats don't ever have any of the waymarks on the prophetic line that we're marking. This is the time of the end, Republican. This is 9/11, Republican. And this is going to be the history of midnight cry, Sunday law in the United States. For whatever reason, the Democrats don't have that. And then this line here, most of us, I have Revelation 13:11 here, almost. And that's when the United States speaks as a dragon, and I contend that one of the characteristics of the United States is its speaking, which we understand to be an action of its legislative and judicial authorities. So typically, not in a class here, not in a group here as up to speed on things as you are, but typically in a group of this size, if I would ask them the question, who was the first president of the United States, they would say George Washington. And I'd say no. Okay, George Washington technically was the 17th president of the United States. Because back in this history, and I don't have the dates off the top of my head, They have a constitutional convention to come together to write a constitution, and it has 7 presidents of the Constitutional Convention in the United States. And the 7th president, who's there when they develop the Constitution that was called the Articles of Confederation, he's also the first of the next 10 presidents that lead to the Constitution. So the first time the United States speaks is back here with the Articles of Confederation, which is pretty, they say, the people that study these things, the Articles of Confederation is pretty, very close to the Constitution. And this is the first place that the government of the United States speaks, but then the Constitution is adopted here. And the Constitution is definitely a subject of Bible prophecy that's marked on several witnesses by Spirit of Prophecy. So the Constitution is spoken into effect here, and the first president in that time period is George Washington, who is the richest president of all the presidents in the history of the United States, until you get to this one here, okay? And initially, I didn't know that until this subject came up, that George Washington was that wealthy, but he was. If you take the amount of property that he owned in his time period and equated that to real estate holdings today, there's none of them that were close to him, except for this guy, because it's showing us that the first is going to illustrate the last. Okay, but this produces this, is that this last president, we also understand, is going to transition into the 10 kings. So you see this first president follows 10 kings, then you have George Washington. The last president is going to become the premier king of the 10 kings, and those 10 kings are going to ultimately come into a threefold union: the beast, dragon, and the false prophet. And if you take 3 from 10, you have 7. So back here at the beginning of the United States, you have 7 presidents without a constitution, 10 presidents with the first constitution, and then the first president that's typifying the last. And the last is going to transcend into the 10 kings, which is going to lead to the threefold union, which leaves a 3 and 7 combination. Pretty profound stuff. And I mean, you guys we're all Americans, right? So you know where the name America comes from, right? It's a man's name. Yes, amen, if you know that. His name is Americo. That's where they got the name for America. And it means rich, powerful, ruler. And of course, these are the 2 characteristics of the United States in Bible prophecy, is their economic wealth and their military might. Rich, powerful, ruler, that's what America is. And the first president was the richest, the last was the richest. And he's the 45th. And the 45th has recently become a really profound symbol. So we're back in the first touch of Daniel, in Daniel chapter 10. I apologize for erasing the board. Yes, I know how to flip the board over, but I just didn't think about it. But I watched people taking photographs of that last board, so you just have to connect with them. Or get it off the internet. So in verse 10 of chapter 10 of Daniel, it says, "And behold, a hand touched me." This is the first touch of Daniel, "which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hand. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee I am now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come forth for thy words." Now, you may not have caught the point I made earlier, But I said the 3 steps from 9/11 to midnight are represented in Daniel 10 as 3 weeks, because twice in the first couple verses of Daniel 10 it talks about 3 weeks. But here now these 3 weeks are going to be identified as 21 days. So what I'm saying is the fact that the chapter identifies the same period of time 2 ways, that you have the prophetic license to treat that as a prophetic symbol. And we know that there are 3 steps between 9/11 and the midnight cry, so I'm saying that I'm applying the 3 weeks as singular steps. 1 week, 2 week, 3 weeks. And here's my argument for it, verse 13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me not 3 weeks, but 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. Okay, what vision is this? Chazon, because one of the characteristics of the Chazon vision and Debar is that it's the vision of many days. Okay, but what is this Chazon going to explain to Daniel, or going to explain to you and I? What's going to befall God's people in the latter days? And as we begin to open up Daniel 11 here this afternoon, you'll see that it's not only opening up the history of the external that's going on between the United States and Russia and the United Nations and the papacy and Islam, but it's also at the same time opening up the Omega apostasy, which is going to befall God's people in the latter days. All right. Verse 15. And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground, and I became dumb. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. This is the second touch. Then I opened my mouth and spake, and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. What vision is this? Okay, this is the vision of Christ. This is the Mari vision. Verse 17, for how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? Doubling there. For as for me, straightway there remain no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Now, at this point, I'm getting into your notes. I think this would be page 1 on your notes. If I'm right, you're going to see 3 touches, Daniel 10:19. Is that page 1 for you? Okay. So, verse 18, it says, Then there came again and touched me, the third touch, one like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me. And the next verse is what we use to apply this at the midnight cry. Okay? He comes to midnight, he's a priest, he goes through the 3-step process, 3 touches, but he's going to end up on the other side of the binding off at the midnight cry by the word be strong, be strong. But what I want you to see in your notes is that the word that is translated as strong twice in this verse actually occurs 5 times in this verse. And 2 times it's translated as strong, but 3 times it's translated as strengthened. But it's the same Hebrew word. And the definition of it from H2388 is in your notes. It means fasten, seize, bind. This verse is identifying the binding off of the 5 wise virgins, but in so doing, it's also placing it at the midnight cry with the doubling of be strong. So let's read that, because we have to have that in place. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. There's the doubling. But this word strong is also going to be translated as strengthened in verse 18 and 19 3 times. It says, And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, same word, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. And in verse 18, he's been strengthened. So this is the binding off. This third touch, the priests have been bound off. We're relating Daniel to the priests. At 9/11, he's making a decision about what food he's going to eat. His name's changed. He's entered into the covenant of 9/11. He goes through the 3-step testing process of 9/11 to midnight, represented by these 3 weeks. When he gets to midnight, he's touched 3 times. He's strengthened. He's bound off. And then he's at the midnight cry. Okay, so this brings us to verse 20. Then said he, knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee, and now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia. Who's the prince of Persia? Well, I skipped over something initially that I needed to put in place. Yes, it's the United States. But we understand that the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in verse 1, is marking the conclusion of the 70 years of captivity. And the conclusion of 70 years, Sister White identifies for us in Prophets and Kings. Don't remember the page number right now. Pardon me? Anyway, she identifies that the 1260 years of papal rule have been typified by the 70 years of Babylonian captivity, so the 70 and the 1260 become interchangeable symbols. So we know at the end of the 1260 years, we get to 1798, which is the time of the end. Therefore, at the end of 70 years, which is what Cyrus is at in his 3rd year, it's the time of the end. Okay? Everyone understand that logic? This is pretty... It's already been out in the public domain for quite some time. Okay, so he's at the time of the end when all this starts, and he goes through this history. It gets to verse 20. The time of the end in our history would be 1989. He's in our history, but he's in the history of the midnight cry. He's just been strong, be strong. And Gabriel's going to go fight with the king of Persia in the time of the end, from 1989 onward. And every 2-horned power in the scriptures is typifying the 2-horned power at the end of the world, which is the United States. So at the midnight cry, Gabriel is going to go struggle with the United States, but it also says in verse 20, now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I'm gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. Who's the prince of Grecia in this history? Be the United Nations. Okay, so we can mark the United Nations. Let's put this up here. If Daniel's at the midnight cry, he's just been bound off as a priest. There's a struggle that Gabriel's going to go get involved with the USA. And when he takes off, right here at the midnight cry, the prince of Grecia shall come. So we have Greece, the United Nations, and the USA marked right here. Okay, now typically, this being the Sunday law, this is the conclusion of the 6th kingdom of Bible prophecy and the beginning of the 7th. Okay, this is the 7th kingdom, the 10 kings. This is the end of the 6th, the USA. But what this is telling us is that the United Nations begins the transition from the United States to the United Nations back here at the midnight cry. Okay, and we have lots of witnesses that from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, that this is where 2 nations are getting joined together. Okay, you have the 2 sticks, the internal of God's people are being joined together from the midnight cry to the Sunday law, but now the external is telling us that the nation of the United States is coming to its conclusion in this history, and the United Nations is getting started in this history. So we have 2 parallel kingdoms going on in this history, and the joining of the 2 sticks of Israel and Judah, which has at least 3 witnesses all by itself, tells us that from the midnight cry to the Sunday law you have parallel kingdoms going on, and this verse is marking the beginning of the United Nations at the midnight cry. Doesn't mean it's the 7th kingdom yet. It's telling us that this is the history where the transition takes place. Verse 21, but I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me with me in these things, but Michael your prince. Also, I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and strengthen him. The first year of Darius the Mede, you can also mark as the time of the end. If you go back to verse 1 of chapter 9, in the first year of Darius, the son of... let's not even do it that way. Let's go to Jeremiah 25:12. This is probably quicker. You guys probably already know this anyway. Jeremiah 25:12. And this may or may not be in your notes. Better start watching the notes. Make sure I'm not doing this off the top of my head. Okay, Jeremiah 25:12. And it shall come to pass when 70 years are accomplished that I will punish the king of Babylon and that nation, saith the Lord, for their iniquity in the land of the Chaldeans, and will make it perpetual desolations. When does Babylon get punished? What's the story in the Bible where we see Babylon being punished?
Daniel 5.
Daniel 5. Okay, so this is the arrival of the Medes and Persians, and it's at the end of 70 years. Therefore, the first year of Darius the Mede and the third year of Cyrus are the conclusions of 70-year periods. They're both marking the time of the end. So we have in this vision, because chapters 10, 11, and 12 are the same vision, we have two witnesses that were to start this vision in 1989. Are at the time of the end, that is all the other time of the ends and the scriptures are pointing forward to. And in verse 21 of Daniel 10, Gabriel's emphasizing, I'm going to show you what's noted in the scriptures of truth. Okay? And the next thing he says is, you need to understand that you're in 1989. And then in verse 2 of Daniel 11, it says, and now will I show you the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and Persia is the United States. And the fourth shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength and through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So in 1989, the president of Persia, the king of Persia, is Bush the Great. And it says, there shall yet stand up 3 kings, Clinton, Bush the Second, and Obama, but the fourth shall be far richer than they all are. And he is far richer also based upon the fact that the first president was the richest president, George Washington. Okay, so to the notes. You have a couple references to Cyrus and Darius in the box in your notes, but I'm going to drop down before that, or after that, I'm sorry. 3 shall yet stand up, far richer, and where it says strength, this once again is one of the characteristics of the United States, power. In the verse there, it says strength, but that's power. And power in the scriptures is military power. It says, and through his riches, which is wealth. These are characteristics of Daniel 11:40, of the ally that the papacy brings to sweep away the Soviet Union. The chariots and horsemen represent military strength. The ships represent economic strength. So through his riches and by his strength, by his power, shall he stir up. Wake up is one of the translations of stir up, all against the realm of Grecia. He's going to, this guy here is going to have a wake-up call for the whole world. Okay, Greece is the whole world. And this, of course, can take you to, let me just check my notes and see if I have it in here later on. I do. I'll jump forward to the next page, Joel 3, 19 through 21. It says he's going to stir up. That can be translated as wake up. And in Joel chapter 3, verse 9, it says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Are the Gentiles the Greeks? Yes. Sister White in Desire of Ages identifies them as such. When the Greeks are in the outer court wanting to speak to Jesus, she lets us know that the Greeks represent the Gentiles. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Now, brothers and sisters, we're going to share something here this afternoon, and you have a choice as a student of prophecy to determine whether or not this war that's going to happen between the United States and Russia is a Cold War as existed from 1979 to 1989, or if it's a hot war. I tend to think it's a hot war, okay? And this is part of the reason. Because this president that's far richer than they all are, he's going to wake up all against the realm of Grisha, okay? And this is not a denial of what we understand about the role of Islam, that Islam's hand will be against every man and every man's hand will be against him. The whole world's going to get drawn into a war, and I'm not saying that Islam is outside the scope of that. Islam's part of it. But I don't think this one that we're heading into is a Cold War, okay? But when we get to that point, you'll see that you do have the option of looking at it that way, if you choose. Verse 10, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spear. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened. This far richer fourth president, after the time of the end in 1989, he's going to wake up all against the heathen, against the Greeks, against the Gentiles. And I'm saying this passage in Joel is corresponding to that activity, and this doesn't seem like a Cold War to me. Verse 12, let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. For there will I set to judge all the heathen round about. Put you in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full. The fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. So where does this take place? Right there at the same place where this fourth king is going to be awakening the Greeks. We got a doubling here. The valley of Jehoshaphat, the valley of judgment, seems like a hot war to me. So back to Daniel 11. And you have a quote underneath here where it says, wake up all, on page 2 of your notes. From Evangelism 2:36, it says, the law of God through the agency of Satan is to be made void. When is the law of God made void in the United States? At the midnight cry. It's fully made void at the Sunday law, and this is where Daniel's placed, is be strong, and this is where multitudes are in the valley of decision. So it's progressive. Your answer was right. It's fully made void at the Sunday law of the United States. But we're looking about where Daniel's viewing this contest from. In our land of boasted religious liberty in our land of boasted freedom, religious liberty will come to an end. The contest will be decided over the Sabbath question, which will agitate the whole world. The whole world. Okay, so back to page 1. Daniel 11. We just finished verse 2. And in verse 3 it says, a mighty king shall stand up. Now, this was Alexander the Great. The correct application by the pioneers. This is the establishment of the world order that Daniel 11 is going to be using as its point of reference when it talks about the king of the south and the king of the north. But it's pointing to the new world order that takes place in the very near future when the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy ascends over the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy. And I'm suggesting that this 45th President of the United States becomes the premier king of the 10 kings, which is the seventh kingdom of Bible prophecy. And there's many lines to show this, these 10 kings in the scriptures. Whether it's the economic strength of these 10 kings, it's 10 kings that is set forth in the ships that represent economic wealth. There's one premier ship, it's the ships of Tarshish. Everyone knows the premier economic ship on planet Earth is the United States. Perhaps the most perfect illustration of this is that you can apply the story of Mount Carmel and Elijah from the Midnight Cry to the Sunday Law. It's just an airtight fit, and in that history you have Ahab married to Jezebel, and you have Elijah. And so Ahab is the king over how many kingdoms? 10 kingdoms. So in this history over here, the transition is taking place from the United States going down, and then this mighty king that's standing up was Alexander the Great, who's going to start a new world order. And we're suggesting that the 45th President of the United States is going to force the United Nations to come into agreement with him to deal with Islam, and perhaps even an alliance between Russia and Islam. Okay, and they're going to come in line, and he's going to be the premier king. He's going to be the mighty king that stands up. And he shall rule with great dominion. And this word dominion, if you notice it, where was that? That's in verse 3. This word dominion in verse 3. And in verse 4, you're going to see the word translated as dominion. They mean two different things. Okay? In verse 3, it says, a mighty king shall stand up and shall rule with great dominion, and that means to rule. And do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor to his dominion. This word dominion is a different Hebrew word, and it means parallel kingdom. So it's identifying that in this history, when he's going to stand up as the mighty king that is the king of the 10 kings, the leader of the United Nations, that he's going to be standing up in the time period of a parallel kingdom, because the sixth kingdom will be going down and the seventh kingdom will be coming up. And with fractals, there's a lot of ways to relate to this. Okay? Not so long ago, at our last camp meeting we had in Arkansas, I don't have it illustrated up here, but I will do it. I presented the French Revolution. No, I presented French Revolution too, but I presented the 10 plagues of Egypt. I think it was at the last camp meeting. And what's the 10th plague of Egypt? Passover. Okay, so the Passover lines up with the cross, and the cross lines up with the Sunday Law. So it's very easy to plug the 10 plagues of Egypt, beginning at 9/11, through to the Sunday Law. Okay, because when you get to 1, 2, 3, it's in this history that we would call midnight that you got the 4th, 5th, and 6th plagues that you can show, and then the 7th, 8th, 9th, and the 10th plague down here. Okay, and it's in here where the finger of God is marked, and you run the finger of God in the scriptures, and you can line it up with midnight. But I presented this, and there was a sister and a group of people there that had just been shown that the 10 plagues of Egypt take place from midnight to the midnight cry. Okay, so she comes up and she's a little bit frustrated that I'm teaching error, and I'm not really understanding what her problem is. And so I said, look, with fractals, they can go by context where you're going to apply them. I'm not opposing the idea that from midnight to the midnight cry, you can put the 10 plagues in there, but you definitely can put them this way too. So what I'm saying, the reason I'm saying that is just to give you an illustration. This here, I'm saying the 10th plague, I have the prophetic license to mark it here because you know it's the Sunday law, and you know the Sunday law has been typified by the cross, and the cross has been typified by Passover, and you know the Passover was the 10th plague. So that's an easy one to see, right? But you also know that the first Sunday law is the midnight cry. So you have the prophetic license to put that 10th plague right here at the midnight cry. Okay, so fractals depends on what context you're looking at him. So when he stands up here and his kingdom is divided, let's just read it. Verse 4. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. That can mean burst or bring to birth. Okay, his kingdom, when the water breaks, there's something brought to birth. And it can mean broken, your water breaks. And divided, and divided means divided in two towards the four winds of heaven. So you can see when he stands up, if it's talking about him standing up as the head of Greece, as the head of the United Nations, that his kingdom's divided toward the four winds of heaven as a symbol of the fact that his kingdom is worldwide. Okay? His kingdom's divided up into east, north, south, and west if you're relating to him here as the head of the United Nations. But in this history here is where Trump is standing up as the last president of the United States, and he's about to give birth. The United States is about to give birth to another nation, but his kingdom is going to be divided by four, and you can show from the study of the plagues that right in here there's going to be 4 plagues, 10, 9, 8, 7, and you can go into the book of Jeremiah, and I think I might have that in here. Jeremiah's 4 sword judgments. Let's just look at it. I don't know that it's in your notes. Yeah, it is. It's right there on page 1. I don't know why I'm saying Jeremiah. It says Ezekiel in the notes. Ezekiel 14. And from verse 12 through 23, says, the word of the Lord came unto me again, saying, verse 12 of Ezekiel 14, Son of man, when the land sinneth against me, the United States has filled up its cup of iniquity when it passes the Sunday law. But it passes the Sunday law even before the Sunday law at the midnight cry. So its cup of iniquity at the midnight cry is pretty much full up. And this is going to tell us that when a land sinneth against God, that he's going to send 4 sore judgments. Okay, so those 4 sore judgments from the first Sunday law can be these 4 plagues, but you could even extend it out after the Sunday law, what's going to happen in the United States. So all I'm running this by you for is to acknowledge that there's a couple ways to approach this by fractals. But there's another way to approach it that I want to put in the mix now that I've acknowledged those fractal applications about the judgments that are going to come on. And if you read down in Ezekiel 14 further, I want to get down to the end of the quote to make sure that you understand that this is the United States. In verse 22, after Ezekiel tells us that when a nation sins against God, he's going to give them 4 sore judgments. And those would be the final 4 is what I'm saying. In verse 22 it says, let's read in verse 21, it says, For thus saith the Lord God, how much more when I send my 4 sore judgments upon Jerusalem, the sword and the famine, the noisome pestilence, noisome beast, and the pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast. Yet behold, therein shall be left a remnant that shall be brought forth, both sons and daughters. Behold, they shall come forth unto you, and you shall see their way and their doings, and ye shall be comforted concerning the evil one that I have brought upon Jerusalem, even concerning all that I brought upon it. Who's Jerusalem at the end of the world? Seventh-day Adventist Church. But Sister White says the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 60-67 was illustrating what? The end of the world. So Jerusalem can be the whole world. It can be the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It can even be the United States, brothers and sisters. Okay, depending on how you're applying it. And it's probably, not probably, when it comes to Jerusalem as a symbol of the destruction that comes upon a nation that has filled up the cup of its iniquity, Sister White, the Bible teaches that the image of the beast test leads to the Sunday law. If you understand that, say amen. Amen. Okay, but the image of the beast test that leads to the Sunday law first takes place in the United States. Amen. Then it's repeated in the world. So the story about the United States is typifying the story that goes on in the world. Sister White has a statement where she says, though she, the United States, leads out, the same crisis will come upon our people in all parts of the world. So at the big external level, what's the punishment that's taking place on the world first takes place in the United States. But Jerusalem is a symbol of this punishment. But the United States is the symbol, the punishment in the United States is the symbol of all of it, because the United States, it's the focus of end-time Bible prophecy. So it's not an accident that the center of Jerusalem is the USA as a symbol. Okay?
These are they part of the 7 last plagues?
Yes. The question is asked, are these part of the 7 last plagues? I'm saying that depending on how you apply it, these last 4 plagues, if you can apply it out to the big level, to the 7 last plagues, then yeah, you could plug it in there at the 7 last plagues. But go to Exodus, and this is a new Bible for me, so I don't have notes in it any longer. Go to chapter 9. Chapter 9 of Exodus, verse 13. This is the 7th plague. Okay, that would be this one here. 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. Chapter 9 of Exodus, verse 13 says, And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning and stand before Pharaoh and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all my plagues upon thine heart. Okay, so these represent not just 4, but all the plagues. And it's the 7th plague where this is claimed. Okay, and it says, For I will at this time send all my plagues. This 7th plague is a symbol of all the plagues upon thine heart and upon thy servants and upon thy people, that thou mayest knoweth that there is none liketh me in all the earth. For now I will stretch out my hand. Okay, so when he's going to send his 7th plague, he's going to stretch out his hand. And if you go back to Ezekiel 14, where we were on the 4 swords judgments, talking about when a nation sinneth against God, as the United States is the nation that is the focus of end-time Bible prophecy. All the other nations are going to follow her example, but the focus at the end of the world is the United States filling up its cup of iniquity. And in verse 13 it says, Son of man, when the land sinneth against me by trespassing grievously, then I will stretch out my hand upon it. Okay, that he stretches out his hand in the 7th plague, which is all his plagues. So if you're understanding her question as I'm understanding her question, I'm saying that you can, with fractals, you can apply these at different areas by context. But enough said about that. I'm not trying to look at fractals at this point. And if we spend too much time there, I will get off the point I want to make. You might not, but I will. Okay, so back to our notes. Still on page 1. The word dominion, if you watch it closely, it's telling you that in that history midnight cry to the Sunday law, you have a parallel kingdoms going on. The 6th kingdom is going down. The 7th kingdom is coming up. And you have a quote from Uriah Smith. And, okay. So what we're saying is this. The quote from Uriah Smith is going to tell you about the Persian kings that are going to yet stand up. What I'm saying is that Daniel is two witnesses. He, in Daniel 10:1 and Daniel 11:1, with the first year of Darius and the third year of Cyrus, is marking the key to understand this as 1989. And there's two presidents that were ruling in 1989, just like there's been two presidents in the United States ruling here in 2017. You know, in 6 days, Trump's going to take office, but Obama was ruling this year as well. Okay, but Bush is Bush the Great in relationship to his son, Clinton. And as you go down in Daniel 11, there's also 4 kings, the 4 Caesars, and there was other Caesars in these, but these are the 4 that are marked in Daniel 11. Clinton is corresponding to Pompey, Bush the second to Julius Caesar, Obama to Octavius, and Trump to Tiberius. Okay, and of course, as you delve into the characteristics of of these Persian kings and these Roman kings, and you apply them to these presidents, it starts to get pretty astounding. Bush, how old was Bush when he was inaugurated? Okay, he was 65 years old. Okay, the number 65 takes you back to where? Isaiah 7. Okay, there's 65-year prophecy that has the starting point for the 22520s. Everyone know that? And it creates a chiasm where in 742, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's when the 65 years begin. And it goes for 65 years to 677, and 19 years in takes you to 723. And then we have a 2520 for this one that ends in 1798. And a 2520 for this one that ends in 1844. We have 46 years here, 46 years here. I'm being just kind of fast with this because you guys already all know this. But we'd still have to have 19 years here, even though time is no longer. This chiasm is going to take you to 1863. Okay? And we all know what happened. We know a lot about what happened. This 742, you have a civil war going on between the north and the south, between Israel and Samaria. And in 1863, you're at the very heart of the civil war between the north and the south in the United States. And this country then has been divided. But prior to 1863, you have 2 horns. What are the 2 horns of the United States? Protestantism and republicanism. Okay, you will find Kenism, Protestantism. This is representing what aspect? What are these 2 horns of the United States? What are they representing? Okay, this is the church. This is the state. Everyone understand that? Prior to 1863, 20, 30 years before, you have 2 political parties that start in the United States. Democrats and Republicans that are going to go through history. Okay, all the way to the end. The Democratic Party is going to espouse the politics of Egypt. Okay, and Egypt is one of the horns of who? France. Okay, Egypt represents the state. Okay, Ezekiel 29 verses 2 and 3 tell us that Egypt is the dragon. Okay, the dragon, Egypt, state. What's the other horn of France? Sodom. Okay, so when you begin to see the two horns of the United States that are going to struggle at the end, you're going to see Democrats and Republicans, these waymarks, and the Republicans are espousing the view of either Republicanism or apostate Protestantism. What is the force behind the Republican Party? It's apostate Protestantism. The Republicans are Sodom. They're the church. They're apostate Protestantism. They're going to begin in 1863 a struggle against each other for the ascendancy, and this here would be the Democratic Party. And if you paid attention in the last election, as I know you did, the Democratic Party got to for the first time in history where they actually had someone that was contending to be their nominee that was an openly avowed communist. Okay? Bernie Sanders. Okay? That's their influence behind them. But most certainly, brothers and sisters, whether you've recognized it or not, what pushed Trump over the top was apostate Protestantism. Okay? Especially if you're a Seventh-day Adventist and knows these dynamics. So in 1863, you have a struggle that is getting underway between these two powers. And so once you see that struggle coming down into this history, here Octavius, let's read about Octavius so I can make a point. In Daniel 11, where it's talking about Octavius, in verse 20, it says, "Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes in the glory of the kingdom." I'm saying that Octavius is typifying Obama, who was the raiser of taxes. He raised the national debt of the United States more than every previous president combined. Okay? And not just barely, way more. He was a tax guy. So was this. The historians talk about a tax guy. But Octavius, his other name was Augustus, and that name becomes the symbol of Roman, the height of Roman influence in the world. It's called the Augustinian age, based upon him. Their height of influence was never higher than in the time of Augustus. And you have to realize that with Obama, he came in the glory of his kingdom. The principles that are the essence of the Democratic Party, the principles of communism and socialism, never reached a higher point in the history of the world compared to when Obama was in office. That was the height of the Democratic rise to power. But they're going down because they're going to be replaced by Tiberius. And there's one historian, and I think it's in Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation by Uriah Smith, where speaking of Tiberius, Uriah Smith quotes a historian that says, "Tiberius only drank one time in his life. He drank the first time and he never quit till he died." Okay. Trump is the one that's going to commit fornication with Rome, and he's going to be drunk with the wine of Babylon all the way through. Okay, that's what this is telling us, brothers and sisters. And he's going to lead to the New World Order. But this guy here, he announced the New World Order. Right here, Bush the Great announces the New World Order, just like Alexander the Great introduced the New World Order, just like Julius Caesar solidified the New World Order for the Romans, and Cyrus the Great, who was Darius and Cyrus the Great, he gives a decree, and it's to go to all the world. Okay, so when you get to these guys, you'll see that after them, there's an emphasis on the New World Order. And here is where the Sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is transcending to the New World Order, and this 45th President of the United States, he's drunk with the wine of Babylon all the way through. And of course you can plug in the French Revolution, but we're not going to go there. All right? And okay, I think I'm going to cut that off there because, brothers and sisters, I think you probably heard about the 4 presidents already. And the more serious stuff is it's not any more serious, but it is what we're going to look at in the following verses. Now, here's what I want you to consider in terms of Daniel 11. What we're going to begin to show in the next presentation. My brother, how much time do I have? Oh, I have 20 minutes, okay. Is we're going to show that what we understood about Daniel 11:40 to 45 is confirmed in these first verses. Okay. Where does Daniel 11 verse 40 begin in history? 1798. That's verse 40. When does verse 40 end? Sunday law. That's verse 41. So what does when the line of the tribe of Judah opened up the book of Daniel in 1989 to this generation, and he gave an understanding of Daniel 11 verse 40, what did we understand about Daniel 11 verse 40? All we got to was 1989. We knew we were still living in the history of verse 40, and we began to see things in between 1989 and the Sunday law, but in terms of Daniel 11, all we saw was the war between the king of the south and the king of the north. Initially in 1798, the king of the south is prevailing, but then in 1989, the king of the north comes and retaliates. But then any information that we have here about 1996, 9/11, midnight cry, it's not derived from Daniel 11 verse 40 to 45. If you understand that, say amen. Okay, but what we did understand about this part of verse 40 from 1798 to 1989, these verses that we're going to look at are going to confirm them airtight, but they're also going to put in place 2 waymarks before the Sunday law. And they're right there in Daniel 11. It's midnight and the midnight cry. The 7th seal in the Millerite history was Samuel Snow's understanding that added clarity to the first seal of William Miller's understanding of the judgment hour cry. The first sealing was the judgment hour message. Samuel Snow's was the last message, and it gave the exact day, month, and year. Miller initially thought 1843. That was the opening of the book of Daniel in 1798. But the final 7th seal for the Millerites gives you October 22nd, 1844. What was opened for us was this history here and verses 41 and onward, but from the book of Daniel, from Daniel 11, we see nothing here. We began to see other things from other passages in prophecy, but not from Daniel 11 itself. Now Daniel 11, this is the argument about it being the 7th seal. It's going to confirm everything that we've understood about verse 40, but it's going to put 2 more waymarks in place, and it's describing warfare between the United States and Russia. And as I said just a little while ago, you may have the prophetic license to think that it is a Cold War, because I'm running out of room even with this big board. In 1989, pardon me? Flip it over? No, some of it I might need to, but that's a good idea. But I might need to run over there and use something that's already up there. In 1989, when we understood Daniel 11 verse 40 initially, the Time of the End magazine in 1996, we didn't say anything about Islam. Okay. Now we understand about Islam. So when we go back to 1989, we realize that there's a 10-year war, and it ended in 1989 in Afghanistan, and it's what we call a proxy war. And it was between Russia, unless you want to call it the Soviet Union, and the USA. In that war, the United States is training and financing bin Laden against Russia, and Russia loses that war, and the Soviet Union collapses, and 1989 identifies that the United States of America is the sole superpower on planet Earth. But part of what brings the Soviet Union down is that they depleted their money and their army fighting Islam for 10 years. Okay? So what we're going to suggest is now we can see two battles over here. A battle, midnight cry. Battle of Raphia and Battle of Panium. Midnight cry, you will see fairly easily. And what's happening at the Battle of Raphia, in the context of what you're going to see in Daniel 11, is that the Battle of Raphia, the king of the south, which we're going to say is Russia, is going to prevail over the USA. But more importantly, in this history that illustrates this, the king of the south, no one thought the king of the south had a chance of winning. Okay, they all knew that the king of the north was the superpower that couldn't get beaten. Okay, but sure enough, the king of the south wins in this history. But in the Battle of Panium, the USA retaliates and prevails. In the history of Daniel 11, it's the king of the north retaliating against the king of the south. So here's the dilemma that I have been presenting to you, is that right now you can see agitation going on between the United States and Russia if you're willing to see. Okay? And there's another proxy war going on in Syria. And this time, Russia is in Syria, and it's brought an Islamic ally with it called Iran. And Russia got into the Syrian conflict in the year 2015. And the first time Russia brought any Iranian troops into Syria was September 11th, 2015. Okay? So this time you have Russia, the same players, Russia and the United States, doing a proxy war, but it's Islam again. And the reason I got Syria in there is because the history where these battles take place in Daniel 11, these are both in Syria. Ancient Syria. Okay? So there's just a lot of connections going on here. So that's what we're going to take up next time. So we know that 1989 can typify midnight. Do you know how it can typify midnight? Are you aware of that with fractals? Are you aware that 1989 is the time of the end for the priests, but the time of the end for the Levites is 9/11. What's the time of the end for the 11th hour workers? Midnight. Okay, so if this time of the end can be midnight, then you can already see a proxy war going on by the same two powers. So you might argue, well, this was a Cold War here. Okay, but what I'm saying is, with chiasms, just because the beginning's a Cold War doesn't mean the end can't be a hot war. Okay, they wanted to kill Elijah. They wanted to arrest him and kill him, but they couldn't do it. But he was typifying John the Baptist, who they wanted to arrest and kill, and they did. So you have the prophetic license to approach it either way. And I'm saying this 45th president, he wakes up all of Grecia. He wakes up the heathen. And in Joel chapter 3, it doesn't seem like no Cold War. All right? And then when you plug in the emphasis that follow me on this, because I'm getting ahead of myself, but follow me on this. In your notes, I'll find you the quote if you're not aware of it. Toward the back of your notes, if I have it in there, it would be. Seems out of context. It's on page 21 of your notes, I believe, in the center of the page. It's from Testimonies, volume 4, page 348. It says, many falter and fall. It says Alexander typifies Caesar. Many falter and fall because of the indulgence of perverse temper. Alexander and Caesar found it much easier to subdue a kingdom than to rule their own spirit. So Sister White is comparing Julius Caesar with Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, he founds the New World Order that is the Greek Empire. And Julius Caesar conquers the third obstacle, bringing the Greek Empire to its conclusion. But simultaneously, he's founding the Roman Empire. So Julius Caesar, Alexander's the beginning of the Greek Empire. Julius Caesar is the end. Sister White has used both of them together as typifying one another. So you got to witness Sister White saying they typify one another. And one is the beginning and one is the end. But they both are the starting point for a new world order. So you can also plug Julius Caesar in here, not in this extent. This is a different symbol. I'm not trying to plug it in here, but Julius Caesar is the establishment of a new world order. So, when you begin to see 45 as a symbol, the new world order that all these new world orders, Julius Caesar's new world order, Alexander the Great's new world order, Cyrus's decree to all the world, Antiochus the Great being the more significant one than his brother, that's also mentioned in the same verse, and Bush the Great announcing a new world order. They're all announcing a new world order. So it's curious that this battle here, it's going on in the history of the 45th president. And the New World Order that we're talking about is the United Nations. If you understand that, say amen. All these New World Orders are pointing to the United Nations. And the United Nations was founded in 1945. After 2 bombs were dropped. One in Hiroshima and one in Nagasaki. And they had plans to drop those bombs, but they couldn't do them because it was all cloudy. So they were forced to drop them on a certain day. They did not have control of when they went to drop those bombs, and the first bomb was dropped on the 6th of August, and the second on the 9th of August. And the 6th is a symbol of midnight, and the 9th is a symbol of the midnight cry. And that same year, the United Nations, the New World Order, was founded. So the implications is that you're talking about the New World Order. This is the most significant date for the United Nations. This is its birth. And of course we were looking at the verses of this 45th president, his kingdom being burst because he's giving birth to the New World Order. And it's these kind of lines of prophecy that are making me think that this isn't a Cold War. It's a hot war. But let each man be fully persuaded in their own mind. And in our next presentation, we'll begin to take up this history in Daniel 11. And then we will finish our studies here, seeing how this history also opens up the Omega apostasy. And brothers and sisters, the seventh seal in the Millerite history was the message of the midnight cry. And when God's people took hold of it, it very rapidly spread around the United States, typifying how this message of the midnight cry, the seventh seal, in our time will spread around the world very rapidly. But where it concludes is where the door closes. I mean, it was just a couple months after Samuel Snow presented the midnight cry message when the door closed. So if what we're going to show you this afternoon is the seventh seal, it's telling you that midnight is almost here. And therefore, if it's giving us any other information about the Omega apostasy, it demands that you understand the Omega has to already be here. Because the Omega has been typified by Sister White. And when Willie White comes into Sister White and says, you need to read some of these passages from the Living Temple, he finally forces Sister White to read it. She gives testimony that she already recognized it long time ago. She didn't need to read the book. That's her testimony.